sort of continuation of my previous live video earlier this week, where I opened up the Apple IIc and installed the ROM 4X. Just quickly tonight, I'm going to be installing the big mess of wires, the BMOW internal, external disk switcher inside the Apple IIc. So let me just shutting the door so I don't wake anybody up. Okay. First things first, let's make a little bit of space here. Probably would be good to just unplug everything from the 2C. Now I promise this time, if you watched my other video, you know that I left 2 screws in the Apple IIc. And that was the main reason I couldn't get it apart. So we'll try not to make that mistake again. That's all lead solder. Not great, but this little guy tipped upside down. We will try to keep the 2C away from that. Okay. Now, the reason we have to do this modification is because the Apple IIc has an internal disk drive, right? So it's right here. And the internal drive is the default boot drive. And there's really no good way, without changing the hardware wiring, to get the Apple IIc to boot from an external floppy drive. And the reason you want to boot from an external floppy drive is because the floppy EMU gets plugged into the external drive port on the back. So without the ability to select this port as your drive 1, you really can't boot many games from the floppy EMU. Sometimes you'll get it to boot. ROM 4X has the ability to select which drive, whether you want internal or external, but then oftentimes the software itself reverts back to the internal drive. So it'll boot from the external drive briefly, and then it flips back to the internal drive, and it doesn't continue loading. So kind of a pain. The creator of ROM 4X was in the Apple II enthusiasts Facebook group saying that he regrets that the most. Adding the ability to select drive 2 in his custom ROM, because many people think that it's foolproof and should work, and then they run into problems and they think there's something wrong, when in reality it's not anything wrong with the ROM. It's just that actually I can leave these in. I don't think I need to lift the disk drive to install this, so I'll leave these screws in for the drive. There's actually nothing wrong with the ROM. It's the software that insists on using drive number 1. And of course, if drive number 1 is wired to be the internal drive, it won't work to boot from an external source. So a lot of folks said that I did it wrong last time, and some people had some tips. So I'm going to try one of those tips, which was, first things first, was to go under here and find that little clip here. It's even with the speaker on the 2C. And then once you've lifted the front, take the back and get the back to come off by dropping it on its handle, which sounds like a terrible idea for a vintage computer, but it works. And then take this, we'll take this disk drive out. Now it's mostly apart. There's just this back corner that is not. And maybe what I can do is just kind of get in here and work it out. I don't know. Did I forget a screw? No. It's just this back corner. Ah, there we go. Okay. Very good. Okay. So, following the instructions, which I read earlier, I think what we want to do is, let me pull them up again. Yeah. So, the internal external drive switcher is a 2-piece adapter for the Apple IIc, so it's 2 pieces. I was wondering as I was looking at this, there's 2 pieces here that I think break off, but let's read that. It comes as one board, but I think you're supposed to snap it on the, so yeah, I do see here on the picture on the website that they show it as 2 pieces. It's a convenience option for the IIc, which normally can only boot from its internal 5.25 floppy drive. In the drive switcher's swapped mode, an external floppy BMOW disk emulator will act as drive 1, and the internal floppy drive will act as drive 2. In normal mode, the internal floppy drive will act as drive 1, and floppy BMOW as drive 2. In dual external and external floppy BMOW with dual 5.25 emulation mode will act as both drive 1 and drive 2. Okay, the drive switcher isn't required, but it makes everything more convenient for a floppy BMOW on a IIc when emulating a 5.25 drive. Installation instructions. This is a 2-part device. A signal tap should be installed inside the Apple IIc and a modified DB9 adapter with 2 slide switches for the external connection. 2 female-to-female jumper wires are passed through the gap in the case to make the connection between the 2 parts. That's this piece here. Both parts of the drive switcher must be installed and connected. If you try to use one part without the other or without the wires that connect the 2 parts, then neither the internal nor the external floppy BMOW drive will work correctly. So, step 1 is to remove the panel from the Apple IIc, top panel. Remove the 6 screws from the bottom case. Use a blunt tool to bend the tab that holds together the bottom panels. The tab is located below the N key. We did that. I showed that. Locate the ribbon cable that connects the internal floppy drive to the motherboard, and that's what it looks like, is right here, and that's this cable right here. This big capacitor. Mine's red. That one happens to be green in the photo. So they want us to take this off and place the signal tap in its place. So let me bring you in a little bit closer here. If I turn it up, it'll be a slightly more interesting shot. Yeah, so we want to take this, that out. Okay, and then let's see. The next step is to break this. And I always feel, there we go. So we just crack that off, and I'm gonna grab a little needle nose and just kind of crack these as well. So here it is. I'm going to zoom out a little. Hello, Alex. Thanks for joining for part 2 of the Apple IIc disk drive trials here. So part 1, we should look at this again. Part 1, we installed the necessary ROM. Now, part 2, we are going to be installing the hardware modification to actually get that external drive to work. Okay, so they want the little switchers on the left side. That makes sense. Okay, that slides in really easily. And I'm going to connect, as shown in the photo, they show the red wire in the back, the jumper in the back is number 2, and the brown wire is number 1. I have a red wire and a black wire, but either way, that's fine. We'll go red and black we'll go red in the back. And black in the front. And then this little ribbon cable gets pushed in here. I like when somebody designs and makes something that just fits perfectly, and they've really made it work. Now, they did say that this needs to be pushed, like, how do I want to say, like in, if you look at the pictures on the installation manual, they want this ribbon cable really jammed down in there. They don't want you to just try to leave it hanging up. So let's do what they say and push this down there. They said it will make putting the case back on a whole lot easier. Yeah, you can see mine. Does mine look like that? I think it looks as good. Okay, keep reading. Now it's time to close the case. First, set the top panel loosely on the 2C and thread the jumper wires through, then reinstall the top panel. You know, why don't we actually try this before we put the top panel on? I think that would make sense, would be to try to put that on. And then, so let's skip ahead to how the jumpers get connected. Connect the jumper wires to the 2-pin male header on the Switch DB9 adapter. Remember to use the same color to pin mapping as pin 1 of the internal board. Okay, so pin number 1 is black and 2 is red. So I'm going to use 1 is black and 2 is red here. So the way this works then is this plugs in to the back like that. So we have the internal board plugged in here, the jumper to the external board, and then the floppy EMU plugs into this header. And you might say, wait a minute, we were plugging the floppy EMU into this DB15 connector, and now we have to use this header connector? Well, if you take a look at the actual floppy drive emulator, the floppy EMU, yes, it has the DB connector, but this is just a 3D printed case, and I'll use my spudger to open it up. Inside here, is a header connector. Now, the frightening thing is that you just want to be sure that your pin 1 matches up, because these things, I don't think, is it keyed? Oh, it is keyed. All right, well, it's good that it's keyed. Sometimes these connectors on the older Apple IIs weren't keyed like that. They didn't have a little bump on the top, so you could put them in either way. And if you didn't mind pin 1, which is normally marked, and you just did it any way you wanted, then you could run into problems where you're putting 12 volts where it shouldn't be. So this is keyed. There's a little cutout on the back here of the connector of the new header here. So we'll put the floppy EMU in there. We'll set these things aside because they're useful for other machines. We do use the DB connector on other Apple IIs. Woo! Thanks for the shout out, Alex. And I like to keep the desk. I have a small workspace here, so I like to keep it neat. And don't mind the spilled lead solder there in the corner. We'll deal with that later. I guess I'll do what I did last time. I'll stand the monitor up on its back. And we'll put a little medicine bottle underneath it to keep it propped up. Turn the light off and let me just Okay, give me just a second to connect power and the monitor cables. Not really used to live television. So, you know, usually you shoot about 60 to 1, 100 to 1 footage, you know, for every minute of television you shot 60 minutes of or more of footage. This is 1 to 1. It's funny though, people do end up watching the live streams after they air, which is kind of cool, or after they stream live. Whoops, the switch was on. It's okay. Okay, I do not see. There we go. No bootable device. Now, I should mind the switches on here, and I probably shouldn't have turned it on until I looked at what the switches said on the back, and they're very tiny. But what the instructions say is here. You've got these different switches, and if I want drive 1 is external, drive 2 is internal, I want D1 to be like that and D2 to be like that. So D1, I want to switch up. Probably don't want to switch it while I'm... And then D2, we want to be... Yeah, that is correct. It's a little confusing and very tiny print, but... Yeah. That's promising because it booted into Oregon Trail. And Oregon Trail is what is selected on the Floppy Emu. So it booted directly into Floppy Emu now that this is connected. Perfect. So let's travel the trail. And yeah, there's that funny little video interference again. You may be a banker from Boston. Sure. What's the first name of the wagon leader? Sorry about that scrolling. That wasn't happening last time. The first name of the wagon leader is Levi. What are the other first names? Well, we don't have to play the whole Oregon Trail right now, but at least we know now. So let's see what happens. I was kind of wondering about this. If I go command, well, not command, it's closed Apple, control reset, and I boot into ROM 4X. It gives me these choices. Do I want to boot internal or external? And again, I flipped them hardware-wise, so now external is internal. So if I want to boot the external drive, I can press 7, and it's actually going to boot the internal drive. You can hear it booting. It's because we've flipped them with this hardware modification. And again, you can't simply not do this hardware modification and expect to be able to use ROM 4X and boot, because oftentimes software is hard-coded to look for internal and external drives, and even the ROM can't override that. So good enough, this is working. I think we can safely put the lid back on and button it all up and call this a very quick success at just under 20 minutes. So project is complete, and we are ready to take the Apple IIc to VCF, and my goal was to have the IIc be the Oregon Trail machine so that people could sit down and play one of the childhood favorites from the 80s and early 90s, the Oregon Trail. Thanks for being here with me on this episode. I hope you'll find your way back here for the next Digital Voyage.